the fact is, traditionally people say that when somebody is elected to the executive branch, they'll have a very ambitious first year, and then they'll scale back. After they get their agenda through in year one, they'll begin to scale back and not be as ambitious going forward. Well, the fact of the matter is, I think this governor, with the announcements that he's made both in his State of the State and in his budget presentation, isn't following that pattern. His agenda, both for the budget and a continuation of the reform agenda, I would submit, is at least as ambitious this year as it was last year. Because the governor has made it clear that he is committed to living within the 2% spending cap, but he also recognizes that there's a $2 billion deficit. Remember, last year, $10 billion, this year, $2 billion, and we got to address that. This year, the deficit does exist, but it exists in part because there are still other growth inflators within the law, and the governor is attempting to address them in this year's budget and reform agenda. The formulas that are operating are not tied to performance, they're not tied to outcomes, and they're not tied to how these programs better serve the people of New York. So, to close the remaining deficit, he will do like he did with Medicaid and education last year, and he will close the deficit by eliminating these automatic inflators. Therefore, we're reducing the inflators in the state operations end of the budget that were scheduled to increase by 4.5%. We're going to make them flat. Secondly, and that saves the state, by the way, $1.3 billion. Likewise, there are automatic inflators in the aid to localities budget, which was supposed to increase by nearly 4%. He's going to eliminate the automatic inflators to that increase, and the increase will be 2.6%. So, Mayor, we're not cutting you all together. There will be a 2.6% increase, but that cut will result in $756 million in savings. Combined, those two measures within the state budget proposal, the executive budget proposal, will close that $2 billion deficit. Let's begin with casino gambling. He proposes a constitutional amendment to legalize gambling, and he tells a story, and I think he's absolutely right, that there really are casinos throughout the state of New York. We call them racinos. They're at the racetracks. We have native casinos, as we know, in this part of the state, and he believes, and I believe the information is totally accurate, that without actually amending the Constitution and allowing the people of the state of New York to decide whether or not there should be casino gambling here, the state is losing out on $1 billion of revenue as a result of not having state-sanctioned, constitutionally approved casino gambling in the state. Medicaid is a very, very major cost driver for counties and local governments, school districts in the end as well. And the Medicaid program for local governments costs $8 billion. To provide relief, back in 2005, when I was in the legislature, you may recall, we put a cap on the amount of growth the counties had to pay annually. There's a graph that points that out. But it's not enough. We get the point. We've heard the message from Mayor Witt, from other elected officials throughout the state of New York. The property tax cap is at 2%, and the cap for counties of Medicaid growth is at 3%. So there's still a deficit. There's still a significant hit on our counties every year. We've heard that message, and Governor Cuomo's proposal will phase in the takeover of the Medicaid growth for counties. Now, in the perfect world, it would be done all at once. Remember, we're still operating at a $2 billion deficit. So he calls for a 3-year phase-in, and the counties will eventually be completely held harmless, and pay no Medicaid increases whatsoever. What the governor has called for is a new pension plan which will have two significant elements to it. First, it will allow new state employees to sign up for a 401k type of defined contribution plan. Second, it will raise the employee contribution rates, require that both employees and employers have risk and reward, so local governments are not the only ones liable for increased pension costs during a down economy. And it will end the pension abuse that we have seen with the pension padding for overtime pay year after year. He's proposing the establishment of a tier 6, which in the end is 50% cheaper than tiers 3 and 4. And what's important to remember here is that no current state employee or retiree, or no current government employee or retiree will be impacted or affected by this plan. It will be prospective for all future new employees who are part of the New York State pension system. The final real emphasis that he's placed with regard to his reform agenda this legislative session is in the area of education. Our system has suffered because Albany has spent more time, it seems, worrying about the business of education as opposed to the students, the recipients, the beneficiaries of the educational system. And the results of the crisis in education are clear. We spend the most, more than any other state in the union, when it comes to our per pupil cost on education, but we lag behind in results. The fact is, we're #1 in spending, and we're 38th in graduation rates. We must fundamentally change our thinking. We must focus on the student, and we must respect the taxpayer. This is a pro-economic growth strategy that is based on fiscal discipline, that's real reform, and that tries to establish an entrepreneurial government to lead us to ultimately a new New York. When Governor Cuomo talks about reform and talks about the need for real change in the state, I think he means business. And I think the evidence that we saw with the success of last year's reform agenda and what some of the issues that I've outlined here this afternoon show that he means business. But in order, as I said in the beginning, for all of this to happen, we will need the full cooperation of the state legislature, which we've seen. We're beginning to round the corner and all. We're beginning to develop a reputation as a state that's getting things done. We need to encourage our legislature to continue that cooperation, and I think that we'll begin to see the results that many of us have been waiting for a long, long time.